If you use the internet on a daily basis, and chances are you do, you probably don't put much thought into cybersecurity. You know, your network connections, the pages you visit, the files you download. You should be thinking about these all the time. Welcome to And Security for All. Your host is Kim Hakam. We're here to help you understand, in general terms, how and why your cybersecurity should be kept in check. Now, here is Kim Hakam.
And that was a lie. I am not Kim Hakam. My name is Steve Winterfeld. I'm the advisory CISO for Akamai. Kim has asked me to host this week. Really excited for the opportunity. And so Kim she's traveling today. She'll be in Toronto tomorrow, the 23rd, for the conference there. And then if you're not able to make that, but you're in Seattle, May 7th will be the conference in Seattle. So continue to look for opportunities to go see the conferences. I know I'm excited when they come to Denver. They're awesome and great insights. Now, having said that, I'm not Kim. I do have a Kim to join me today. Kim, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Steve. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. So my name is Kim Gomez. I am the Director of Security Research at Akamai. My team and I are responsible for the creation and publication of the State of the Internet Security Report that's been in market over a decade now, actually 12 years.
So, one of the things Akamai does is it tries to share some insights from all the threat data that they see. Akamai, has edge protections with a WAF, with AI API security, with AI firewall. It has internal segmentation capabilities. It has, MFA. It has so many different security capabilities across this platform that they put out these state of the internet reports, multiple each year. The one that kicks off every year is kind of one that focuses across what's the latest going on with your web pages, your presence on the internet. It then covers what's going on with APIs. So APIs are application interfaces. So if your phone is directly talking to a database and your phone and the application is interacting, that's typically through an API. And then AI, what's going on with AI, be it a large language model that's machine to machine, or Gen AI, where you're talking to some chat GPT or pick your flavor. And finally, distributed denial of service, where, through a typical example is back in the day with Mirai. Mirai was a bunch of Internet of Things. They were all compromised, and then all of those devices would attack one web page, knocking it offline. And they might do it for ransomware. They might do it for political reasons. But those are kind of the big things that were covered in these reports. And I know the next one coming out is on an industry finance. But Kim, talk to me about what you and your team, some top insights from the report that recently was released.
Sure. So I think, talking that we have been doing these reports for over a decade now, people think to themselves, did the topic ever get boring? Of course not, because we've expanded our focus as attackers expand their focus. So as you said, APIs, distributed denial of service, so DDoS attacks, and AI. So AI is definitely a strong undercurrent in our first report of the year, because AI is really changing the game. So first off, I think one of the main things to call out is attacks, web application attacks have risen by double digits. DDoS attacks continue to rise, as you said, by those turbo variants. I mean, things are getting more complex, more sophisticated. But attack economics have fundamentally changed, right? Automation, AI. Attacks that were sophisticated 10 years ago are, kid stuff now, just with the accessibility of resources, the opportunities, the expansion of the attack surface. So APIs have changed that, right? They've expanded the attack surface. And then the way that applications and APIs work together. You can't just think of them, and by you, I mean an organization, shouldn't be thinking about, I need to protect my applications and I need to, protect my APIs. They're intertwined. they're working together. So those are, in working together, it does bring about something that we'll talk about a little bit later that I'd love to cover on, which is visibility gaps, right? So making sure that you're thinking about your applications and your APIs together, because as we talk about in the report, that those gaps are creating quite an open door for attackers. And some of the biggest attacks that we saw in 2025 that we talk about in the report are not necessarily the huge outages. Sometimes these attacks are really degraded performance. They're huge infrastructure bills. They are customers blasting you on social media because they can't get to your website, or they can't order on something on an application. It's the bottom line is expanding and changing. So we cover all of those areas within the report. But Steve, I know you've had a chance to take a look at the report yourself. What did you find interesting?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. One of the things, when I go talk to the board, when I talk to my peers, we want to understand what's going on across the industry, what's going, with between finance and commerce, or within just finance, because I want to understand, what the trends are. And so, as we look at these, we talked about APIs, and the reason we talk about them is, as I work with IT department, so many of our applications are moving towards APIs. And if we're putting out this Gen AI, the Gen AI is using APIs to interface. And so, APIs are becoming more and more critical. And as we look at this trend, the attacks against APIs have jumped 113% year over year. And I always, go back to that old statement that we all love to joke about, why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why are people attacking APIs? Because that's where we're starting to have our revenue transition to. That's where we're investing in. And in a lot of cases, because we're in transition, because we're in rapid deployment, our security and our quality may not be as high.
I would agree with that. I think that another area where we're talking about this explosion in growth in the number of attacks, is DDoS. And DDoS grew 104%. And we think about DDoS, for anybody who remembers, over a decade ago, there were the big bank attacks that were in the news around the 2012, 2013 timeframe. But as the years have gone on, Mirai was the attack variant that came up quite a bit. And that variant is still there. It's foundational, and it is powering some of the biggest turbo botnets that we saw in 2025. So that just shows you that when attackers find something that is successful, and now with the tools at their disposal from a resources standpoint, both from we're thinking about IoT devices and AI, they can just blow it out. And I think that that's an interesting concept, that attackers always go back to what has been successful to them. Kind of like you go where the money is. Now you're going, well, if it worked once, why would I, not use it again? So I think that that's interesting that Mirai is still out there.
Yeah, and I will tell you that some of the motivation has changed too. DDoS attacks at one point were largely from hacktivists based on, political motivations. And then over time, we saw that they became, if you don't pay me, 30,000 in crypto coins, then, we're going to knock you offline during Super Bowl betting if you're a betting site or something like that. So, I'm going to pay you not to take me offline. But then we see again this shift, which if you look in the report in the regional, there's really big shifts between Asia and Europe and America. And a lot of this is driven by these geopolitical conflicts. And so, if you see somebody do, the United States or Europe do an economic sanction, you may see somebody out of the Middle East or Russia doing a attack against the financial institutions in response to those socioeconomic attacks. And kind of a hybrid of a criminal group on Monday is a political hacktivist on Tuesday. often state sponsored. So a lot of those motivations are changing, but so is the capability. And like you said, with Turbo Mirai variants, we've seen a paradigm shift in the capabilities of attacks. Another area I want to jump into is kind of these changes that you talked about up in your first comments. It's around vibe coding. So vibe coding is I want to write a program. I work with some Gen AI application, and it quickly develops the code based on my natural language queries, me just talking to it. I can do a denial of service attack system by just vibe coding. I can work with these new systems to automate an attack campaign. So, I don't have to go do things. The machine is taking care of all that work for me. And finally, it's really changing the abilities for me to write, I laugh because, I may write an email and then go ask it to check it out on Gen AI. Well, they're doing the same thing for phishing emails. They're having Gen A write those phishing emails. So all of those are getting a lot more sophisticated.
We talk about vibe coding. That's something we also cover off on in the report as well. It's not just attackers who are, leveraging vibe coding. It's organizations, and that speed to get ahead. They're leveraging AI for that, and while it can be fast and efficient, it's also opening the door when it comes to production because you just aren't checking. And I do want to go back to APIs real quick and just talk about. So we have an upcoming survey that Akamai sponsored with an independent agency for NESIS, the 2026 API Security Impact Study. And one of the little nuggets from that report that I thought was really interesting that just talks about that proliferation of APIs and organizations' reliance on them. That survey indicated 87% of respondents, and by the way, it's a global survey, reported experiencing an API-related security incident in 2025. 87%. I mean, this is a global survey across a variety of titles across different organizations. And so if AIs, I should say, are a force multiplier, you add APIs into the mix, it's chaos. And just going back to AIs, I know AIs can be exciting, and to some organizations they might seem scary, but the reality is that right now and how we think about AIs, they are reinforcing existing weaknesses rather than creating new categories. I mean, I think, Steve, that it's a little early to actually say what are AI threats versus saying that AI has a lot of opportunity to exploit what's already out there. What are your thoughts about that?
So, I mean, AI is a two-edged sword, obviously. So, let's take a tool like segmentation. Akamai has an ability to do micro-segmentation. And in the past, I may have had, a senior analyst go in and say, where, there's a new zero-day attack. Where are we using the protocol that has been compromised? What kind of data is being accessed with that protocol? Well, now with natural language queries, AI is able to look through all the things that are segmented and do that as a junior analyst just by asking that question. And so, it's a huge boon to us on the security side. The flip side is the criminals are using things like fraud GPT or worm GPT, or you've heard recently about Mythos. Again, that's a positive use. But all of this is to say, it's early days because, we have a lot of hypothetical discussions out there. I talked about an AI doing an entire campaign. Haven't seen a ton of that. Haven't seen a lot of the social engineering improvements. And then, so there's outliers. We're very early days on how this will develop.
I think it's definitely something. I mean, Akamai is a security organization. We're keeping an eye on it as a topic throughout the rest of our State of the Internet security reports for this year. It's definitely going to be that common thread because it is such a conversation starter, what organizations are keeping on their mind. But it's interesting because some competitors out there would say, that AI is already there creating its own threats, but I think time will tell. And if we're talking about AI, then there's agentic AI, right? So the decision-making side of AI. And There are vulnerabilities associated with that, and of course, the expansion of the attack surface. I think there was a new OWASP. Oh, I'm sorry. So that's Open Worldwide Application Security Project. Just want to make sure I'm not using too many acronyms. So there was a new OWASP framework that identified 10 specific threats to AI agents that make autonomous decisions. I mean, there's been a lot of things in the news that, was an AI could buy a car for somebody for $10 and all kind of crazy things like that. So, Steve, you worked on an agentic AI section actually in the report for us. Can you define what that is for everybody? Because I'm not sure everybody knows really what agentic AI is.
So again, if you go out and just use ChatGPT, that's a large language model. And one of the things I love about OWASP, and so OWASP is a volunteer organization. It's been around for 25 years. And it's got 60 chapters. So look for a local chapter near you. And it's a great place to go network and get better at, at internet level threats. There's over 30,000 volunteers. So if you're looking for a place to expand your skills, a great, organization to volunteer with and collaborate in this analysis. But basically what OWASP did was, the first one is, these are the top 10 threats hitting web pages. And so I, as a CISO, would go look and say, okay, developers, I want you to not make these mistakes. And pen test team, I want you to test for these mistakes. And the SOC, I want you to look for these mistakes. And those give me the highest return on investment, because all the volunteers have said these 10 coding vulnerabilities are what is being used by most of the threat. Well, then pretty soon they came out with, these are the top 10 for API threats. And again, when you see a new list like that come out, you probably need a new strategy, a new tool. About the time that came out, APIs, became a new capability that Akamai protected. And then there was one on large language models. And again, we now protect those. And so you can kind of see that this, every time they put out a new one, it's a different set of threats. Well, they just put out a top 10 for agentic threats. So whereas, you went malware on the early ones, now you're doing logic attacks. You're doing attacks against things like a chain of actions or misuse of authority or amplifying failures. And so you need to train your people, and you need to look at your security controls in a different way, because it isn't like, the top 10 for basic web pages with broken access controls or server-side request forgeries. These are more logic issues. And so I encourage everybody to, both within the report and directly with OWASP, go understand these, because, we just can see that this is there. Again, great for threat modeling, a great example of how to use OWASP to look at the dangers within yours. You're still going to need, web application firewall, API protection, AI firewall, probably segmentation on the back end, but it's so useful in so many ways.
Very important, and also something we do cover in a lot of our reports. OWASP usually sneaks in to most of our reports, and I think for security professionals, it's crucial to keep up with it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about DDoS, which happens to be one of my favorite topics, close to my heart. That's also because I joined Akamai many years ago through the Prolexic acquisition, and that was a DDoS mitigation security company. So when it comes to DDoS, over the last decade plus, I mean, we continue to see it growing and maturing and becoming more and more sophisticated. As we talked about earlier, with these Turbo Mirai variants and the opportunities that attackers have. But, some of the insights in the report that we cover off on is just what industries are really getting targeted by these types of attacks, these debilitating attacks. And I don't think it's a surprise, Steve, to you. It wasn't to me that financial services is a top DDoS target, right? That's where the money is. That's where the opportunity is when it comes to extortion. The gaming industry, huge one. Back in the day, that was one of our top areas for attackers that we would make sure that we were on top of, just for competitive advantage opportunities, right? So playing Call of Duty and you want to knock somebody offline and take their spot, that's still done. Manufacturing, high tech, which we would call software, and SaaS and commerce. So all of these industries, it's not really a surprise because there's just the opportunity for attackers when we think about DDoS. We also talked about last year in one of our previous study reports, quadruple extortion, right? So having all these.
Well, I want to jump in real quick.
Sure.
So as we talk about this, I want to make sure everybody understands when we're talking about these denial of service attacks, there are three things we look at.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, are you attacking my infrastructure?
Mm-hmm.
Are you attacking my servers? And those are the kind of attacks we were just talking about, is attacks against our servers. And so, if our employees are trying to log in, if a customer is trying to log in directly to some page, those are really, now layer 7, because a web page is those infrastructures is attacks against 3, 4. As you look at the layer 7 attacks, those against the web pages or the AI or the APIs, those are much higher level. And I think those have a different set of customers being attacked. Is that true?
That is true. So media, in that case, is the top vertical that we observe for layer 7 attacks. And when we say media, that's an umbrella vertical and how we define that particular industry. And there's sub verticals. So things, so social media sites are under media. Broadcast is under media. So we also have publishers. So think about newspapers, news outlets are also under media, which would make sense with the proliferation of hacktivist campaigns, right? So if you also want to make a point as a hacktivist and you have a political point that you want to make, you're absolutely going to launch those distributed denial of service attacks against a media organization. And there's also the double-edged sword with that a lot of hacktivists also leverage ransomware tactics, right? So DDoS has become a part of the ransomware toolkit. So it is versatile as an attack methodology. And, Steve, you talked about those geopolitical hotspots. It's something that Akamai, as a security organization, is keeping an eye on in 2026, because we got a couple of them. We have a couple of them, for the last 3 years, we've been talking about the Russia-Ukraine pretty consistently in our security reports. And now we have a couple of other geopolitical hotspots, the Middle East and in Asia Pacific, that we're also keeping an eye on. So there is the possibility that some of these top industries may change as we go, as we move into through 2026 into 2027. But I did.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I will say I find it interesting that finance was number 1 in infrastructure attacks, but not even on the top 5 for web page attacks. And commerce was number 2 in web page attacks, number 5. So it seemed commerce is one that and gaming was in there, and software. So there's a couple that again, if I was a CISO or in security in a media company, that would be something I want to share with the leadership, is our industry is more targeted than others. And that's, helps me when I go in and have budget discussions, which is one of the advantages of having this quantified ability to go and talk about this.
And it's an interesting point you bring up about having those discussions at the board level, right? Because part of what is important in our State of the Internet Security Report, it's not just talking about threats. It's not just talking about the top industries under attack. It's about mitigation, right? So what do you do with all of this information, in your organization, whether you're, a security practitioner, you're somebody who advises the CISO, you have to have a good handle on mitigation, right? Especially when you're talking about DDoS. And what does that mean? It means having your stakeholders aligned, prepping for incidents, testing is so important. Validation is so important, and thinking about a multi-layered defense, right? And I think, Steve, that kind of goes into another topic that some of our subject matter experts in Akamai keep bringing up around, I guess you call it cyber hygiene, right? And While we think about mitigation with DDoS and having something really built out and defined, how do you think about it with like internet hygiene, right? Vulnerabilities that aren't patched and those opportunities that bad guys or malicious actors, if you will, have to kind of exploit those.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a couple things. You're talking about the multi-layered defense.
Mhm.
And so when I look at that, we talked about we need to defend our web pages. We need to defend our infrastructure. What we haven't touched on in our discussion much, but we really emphasize in our report is also DNS, domain
Mhm.
name services.
Mhm.
And so that is basically, for those that have been around back when we had phone books, that's the phone book for the internet. Now I would call it the GPS for the internet. When you type in, I want to go to, myfavoritestore.com, I would then, DNS would then translate that to an IP address. And so if you block that DNS, then when somebody types in their favorite store, it can't be found. Or you may type in your favorite store and someone has poisoned the DNS, so it takes you to a different store. And so, this DNS is another critical part of our multi-layered defense that we need to protect against. And so, one of the things we talk about within DNS, and we'll do this through all the different ones on hygiene, is uptime and basic hygiene. You want to make sure that your DNS is robust. You want to make sure it's segregated in a way that one thing going down doesn't take everything down. You want to make sure that you enforce strong controls and you have visibility so somebody can't get access to it and manipulate it. You use multi-factor authentication. You use audit logging so you can see what's going on and look at change management to understand that someone's poisoned it or manipulated in a way that you don't want. You want to make sure that you are updating, posture management and compliance and doing things like understanding where you have services out there, making sure your certificates are authentic, look for emerging threats and future readiness, you know, something that starts coming up like typo squatting, lookalike domains, brand impressions. These are things that I want to know about and I need to track. So if someone is coming in and maybe not directly attacking our DNS, but doing brand impersonation or redirecting people to different sites, I want controls out there to protect against those things. And then ultimately, one of the things we're trying to do with future proofing is understanding, what's post-quantum cryptographic challenges. As quantum comes in, it's going to break a lot of our current security capabilities. And so we want to go in and make sure we understand those high levels. Kim, any thought on the DNS stuff before I jump into some of the others?
No, I think you covered. I mean, this is an area that I think a lot of people, as you said, the phone book of the internet, people don't think about it as much anymore. But I think it's something as good security corporate citizens, we focus on at Akamai, and it's also something that we cover in the report itself. We have a checklist that we think that would be really beneficial to CISOs and organizations in general, just to make sure that everything you're talking about, they're also thinking about, and that they can use that for reference.
And then, we talked about this hygiene is going back to the basics is another way I've often heard this called.
Mhm.
And that ties into something like OWASP. If I'm going in and I'm taking care of these top 10 for web apps, and so OWASP is normally thought of as the top 10. And again, like I said, APIs, large language model, generative AI. They also do things like the top 10 for mobile apps or
Mhm.
for phones. If you use Kubernetes or pipeline is, your methodology, they have a top 10 for CI/CD. They have a top 10 for supply chain risk. So somebody like manufacturing or really any of us want to understand what our supply chain risks are. That's a great one. Client side, Internet of Things, medical devices is another way to think about that. Smart contract vulnerabilities, low code, no code,
Mhm.
again, a method of development, and privacy risk. And so OWASP is another great tool that I can use for free. And I love free. So
Same.
I can go so I can go in and work with them. And then, again, how do I use these OWASP lists? For me, that's pretty straightforward. I mean, I want to use them in my training. I want to make sure you know, if it's supply chain, I sit down with my supply management people. I sit down with my contracting people, my CFO, and we kind of walk through this as training to understand what the risks are. And then do we have processes in place? Do we have technology in place? Have we done an exercise to validate our processes? I can then go look at these top 10 to see, is it in my databases? Do I have logs of it happening to us? Again, for agentic AI, I may not have logging set up right now. I may not have visibility. I may not have the ability to go do a forensic investigation. And those are critical things to find out. Again, with large language models, I may not have an internal taxonomy.
Mhm.
And this is a way for me to start to put out processes and write these into our processes in a way that we're managing it. Because again, I'm going to get audited. Worst case, if we have a large breach, I'm going to end up in a class action lawsuit. I'm going to want these. I know with agentic AI that we talked about earlier, that top 10 has great playbooks,
Mhm.
things that you can turn around and instantly use in your security operations center. And then finally, for my pen test teams, any thoughts on or how you've used any of the OWASP?
Not more so on OWASP, but I did really want to go back because a lot of what you were talking about OWASP, which just made me think about, DDoS mitigation and having a really in-depth plan for when attackers and attacks happen, right? So I mentioned briefly what are those things you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about stakeholder alignment. But what are we talking about when we're talking about stakeholder alignment? We're talking about internally ensuring that all the teams involved, right? Security operations, IT, incident response, crisis management, everybody understands and is collaborating seamlessly to detect and mitigate threats. You also want to have a clear vendor SLA, right, that defines escalation, pass for rapid response. That is crucial when we think about mitigation. Also, having designated decision makers and contacts at every level. When an attack happens, that chain of command needs to already be pre-established so there is no time wasted because time is money. Step-by-step response protocol. So having a playbook is crucial, right? So Steve, you just talked about that. Having that documented, being able to refer to it, pen test against it, update it, that is crucial for organizations. And I think it's a key theme throughout this whole discussion, right? Multi-layered defense. They're not just going after, whether we're talking about DDoS, whether we're talking about AI, whether we're talking about APIs, attackers are looking for all vulnerabilities and opportunities. So they're not just necessarily going to say, oh, I just want to attack that thing. No, they're going to say, well, if I can get in through a phishing scam, or if I'm able to, manipulate an AI, they're going to do as many of those things as they possibly can. So you want to think about your security protocols from a multi-layered perspective. And then, of course, bringing up DNS was great as well, because that's an area, as I said, that I find that a lot of people don't think about as much anymore.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I've got to understand where these are, and so many of DDoS protections involve third parties.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where you really need that synchronization because, if I'm getting attacked and again, the days of a slow attack that grows over time are gone.
Mm-hmm.
The attacks now are much faster. They go from a low-level proof of concept attack to reaching a new, record-setting peak in minutes. And so I don't have a lot of time to pull people in and set up a war room and react. I need things that are almost automated. And if it's a third party, I need to be notified. I may not have direct visibility, so I need to have that coordinated, and then right away the durations are changing. We're seeing durations getting longer. And so what, a 3 or 4 minute attack, I may not have to report that to regulators, but I need to have in my process. If it's a full hour, do I need to report that to regulators if I'm in a regulated industry? When do I need to let the board know we had a denial of service attack? What's the level of impact that drives those decisions? And so when we talk about this incident preparedness, it really needs to be integrated. I need to make sure my contact lists are up to date, that my crisis management team is integrated. My RACI, I don't know if you've ever dealt with a RACI, but it's, who's responsible, who's informed, who do I coordinate with? All those things have to be laid out in a way that I minimize the impact of these kind of things. And so, go ahead.
It's a lot. It's a lot to think about, and it's not going to get any easier. That's for sure.
And so, this kind of goes back to visibility. Ultimately, we've talked a lot about so many different things today. We kicked off with just the typical, I have web pages out there. My customers are logging in through these portals or these web pages. And how do I have visibility on them? You mentioned earlier, denial of service may not knock those pages out, but if my experience goes from trying to log in and it goes very smoothly to trying to log in and I can't log in, and when I do log in, it eventually bumps me off, or when I try to get some information, it takes 5 minutes to get an answer back. Those can be huge depending on which market you're in.
And social media makes that much worse for organizations because consumers will go out there and blast you for it.
Yes, and then the second one is around these APIs. I've got so many APIs out there now that when I go work with my team, I've got different names for them. I've got shadow APIs with are unauthorized. I've got zombie APIs that somebody set up forgot and now aren't part of my protection strategy and open up back doors. I've got rogue AIs where somebody just didn't, put a new API out there to connect directly into our systems, but didn't go through the security gates, didn't go through the quality assurance, isn't monitored by either IT or security to see what's happening on it. And so that discovery becomes so critical. So one of the questions I have to ask is, how am I discovering? I'm pretty mature on discovering web pages. How am I discovering where those APIs are? How am I discovering where I'm using AI, be it large language or, agentic AI? How do I know where that's happening? How am I monitoring it? What are my triggers to go in and mitigate it? There's so much abuse out there of these APIs. There's scraping and there's different, harvesting of data, that there's just so much going on across all of this.
Well, I would be remiss in not using that as a great plug for some of the upcoming research that my team and I are planning for the rest of the year when it comes to the State of the Internet Security Report. So we recently, it was about 3 weeks ago, published the first in an Insight series where we talk about AI bots, right? So this has been a hot topic since the summer of last year. Akamai has been publishing blogs and other reports really talking about this rise. It was over 300% in the second half of 2025, this rise in AI bots. And in this case, we take a look at the impact on the publishing industry. So you saw, when it comes to DDoS, publishers under the media vertical are under DDoS attack, but they're also being bombarded by AI bots. So really interesting topic, and a lot of interesting insights came out of that, because as with everything AI, we just don't know yet what those AI bots are doing. So It's a really interesting topic. The rest of the year, we're going to be, as Steve mentioned earlier when we got started, financial services is coming. We're taking a deep dive into commerce. We have an agentic AI threat landscape report planned for later this summer. Fraud and abuse, right? Hot topics for organizations, no matter what vertical you're in. Talking about ransomware, phishing, extortion, and of course, building on a topic we published on late last year, and AI bots, and seeing just a year later, what does this AI bot threat landscape really look like? The team is also very active when it comes to working with our threat researchers on blogs and webinars. So a lot of these topics, we won't wait a year to report on again. These are things that, the CISO and the security practitioner really need to keep on top of. So be on the lookout for future publications, and these topics will continue to be explored and reported on. And let's see where we are a year from now in terms of AI. I'm very curious.
Yeah, and I think, there's some overlap. We have a report just on kind of focusing on AI.
Yeah.
Some of those attack chains we're seeing starting to come
Mhm.
out, some of the different concepts. I know in finance we talked a little bit about building and how to think about securing, deploying agentic AI.
Mhm.
We always talk about the kill chain. I know we're
Mhm.
doing more in some of the upcoming reports around MITRE, which is,
Yes.
I think, is just as valuable as a capability as OWASP, and how to use that attack chain to evaluate what's going on. So I'm really excited about some of the stuff coming out. I do want to highlight, if you want to read about all of the things we're talking about, go look for the SOTI, SOTI. This one is called Apps, APIs, and DDoS 2026. Prepare for the convergence crisis. You can go download the report. It really delves into some regional aspects, a lot more tech details.
Mhm.
You can pull some of the stats out and turn around that and use that for internal briefings. And so just a tremendous set of capabilities. Um, you know, Kim, what was your favorite part of this last report that really surprised you?
I think that I'll be honest, it was the DDoS part of it, and I think that's because of just so many years working in security and seeing that some things are old as new, and things never go away. And I think that what's also interesting to see is I had a regional expert I was talking to when we were putting the report together. He was saying, "Oh yeah, web application attacks are going up. They've gone from 13 billion to 15 billion." He goes, "Yeah, what's the big deal with that?" I think that that is what has changed in over the years, is that the numbers are not compelling anymore. People expect attacks to continue to go up and to the right. I think it's now the methodologies, the accessibilities, the resources, the complexity. That's what surprises me, because I'm not surprised that attacks are going up. Attackers are always going to leverage those opportunities, but I think the scale at which they're going up, and now having AI as part of the mix, as you've covered off on, it's just making everything even more crazy for them. And it gives us, as researchers and as subject matter experts, it gives us a lot to talk about.
I think for me, it's not such a surprise. It's just I'm utterly fascinated by where we're going with agentic AI,
Yeah.
with enabling systems to make decisions, be it a decision about a patient, a decision about an insurance claim, a decision about a financial, loan application. There's so much potential for risk there. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah. Yeah, the
So
speed at which everything is happening now, with attack times now, compressing, and everything being able to be done so quickly, it makes it for a lot more of a challenging environment for everyone.
So Kim, I want to thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
It's always a blast to talk with you. Learn so much every time I get to spend time with you. To everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you spending time with us. Please don't forget Toronto, Seattle. Check the FutureCon website. These are fantastic events. Please come join us in person when you can. Thank you.